Yeah, now we're good.
Okay. Well, we have a quorum, folks, so I'm going to start. And let me begin by welcoming everybody to the 2020 Annual General Meeting of the Yukon chapter of the Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society. I'd like to start by acknowledging and letting folks know that I'm really honored to be able to meet with everybody here on the traditional territory of the Kwanlin Dun First Nation and the Tonquachin Council. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Eric Val, and I'm the president of the Yukon chapter of CPAWS, and I also sit as the vice president of CPAWS National. So here at the CPAWS offices, I'm here with Chris Ryder, who's the executive director, with Adil Dervish, who's the communications coordinator, and Judith Van Gluck, the office manager. At this point, I'd also like to introduce the other board members who are participating in this meeting, but in the virtual world of Zoom. We've got Karen McKenna, who is the vice president, Gail Corey, who is the treasurer, Sandy Johnson, who's the secretary, Joel Lewitt, who's the director, and Dan Palechki, who's also a director. I would, at this point, just like to mention that we're going to ask Adil, who's our technical wizard, explain to us how the meeting's going to proceed.
Thanks, Eric. So welcome to Zoom. I'm just going to go over a couple housekeeping things so you can kind of navigate your way around, and so that you can also participate in voting if you are a member. So firstly, if you take your mouse and hover to the bottom of Zoom, you'll come across this little toolbar, and I'm going to briefly kind of go over what the important icons mean. And the first one is on the left, and that's to join audio. I think everyone can hear us, but if you can't, or if someone in the comment section decides or mentions that they can't hear us, that's where you would join your audio. After sort of the formal proceedings are done, we're going to have a more informal time to chat with staff and members and board members. And so that's where you can, this is where you can turn your video on and off. We will be voting for certain motions and certain things. And so for us, we're going to be using a function in Zoom to vote by clicking on the participants icon. And when you do that, you'll see either a yes or a no, and you'll see a bunch of other icons, but we're going to be focusing on yes and no. And that's going to help us know your vote, whether you agree or disagree with the particular motion that we are working with. Yeah, so we're going to emphasize, like, you won't have any pop-up. There won't be any prompt other than us asking you to vote. Yeah, clicking participants now and just leaving it kind of open might be a good option for you. And then after participants, there is a chat icon. And I see a few of you have already introduced yourself to us in the chat. But if you wish to do so, you can click on chat. You can introduce yourself to us. You can ask us questions. And you can also see who else is here, which is great. So we're going to do a quick little test, if that's okay. And I'm going to run a quick poll right now that I'd like for you guys to participate in. And it is, are you a current member of CPAWS Yukon? So I'd like you to click participants and then choose yes or no of whether you are a member, just to make sure that everyone kind of knows how it works. And if you're not sure, you're welcome to just pick one. It's mostly so that we kind of, so that you kind of know how things are working. And I see a bunch of you already have made those.
So Adil, on my participants, it just has invite or alt I. it doesn't show the yes or no icon.
Okay. For you, can you chat as well? Can you type in the chat? Yes, you can, because you messaged.
Yeah, the chat is working.
So maybe for you, if you can't see the yes or no, you can just chat your vote, if that's okay.
Okay.
We will record it that way.
Okay. Oh,
Yeah.
there, when I open it, I see it.
Mhm. Thanks, Dan. So it seems like everyone else who, or not everyone else, but I think Kate, Malcolm, and Rhiannon, I think you guys are okay. So it seems like everyone has figured out how to vote. Thank you very much. I'm going to clear all your votes, and you can continue on.
Great, thanks, Adil. Okay, so we have a couple of things to do before we start with the details of today's meeting. And we need to take a look at our agenda, which I think Adil has up on the screen now for people. So please take a moment to look at the agenda, review it, and provide us any changes or additions. And you can do that, as Adil mentioned, in the chat function. And I'll just take a moment to let people think through that, and then we'll pass a motion to approve it, or with or without changes. So you'll be able to see if people are chatting with changes.
Yeah. Sandy, I see you raised your hand. Is there something you'd like to add?
Yeah, I just wondered about, are we required to have the minutes from the last year?
Yeah, that'll be Sandy, that's a good point, and that'll be the next thing that we're going to review, make any amendments to, and then a motion to approve. So that's coming up right after we've got the agenda approved.
But it's not written in the agenda, so I think that's fine. Yeah. Thanks, Sandy. Yeah,
Okay. Okay, so hearing that there's nothing to be added to the agenda at this stage, could I have somebody pass a motion basically approving the agenda as presented?
And you can just unmute yourself and do that verbally if it's okay. I see, Wendy, you've raised your hand, but.
Yeah, I'll approve the agenda.
Great, thanks, Wendy. So, and could somebody please second that motion, please?
Sandy does.
Okay, hearing no opposition, consider the motion passed. Approved. Okay, and now to pick up the point that Sandy mentioned, we also have the minutes of last year's meeting, which was on June 5th. And it's there for any amendment or changes or corrections as needed. I'm going to take a few minutes to let people think that one through, and then we'll go through the same process of a motion and a seconder. As people are thinking through last year's minutes, I again want to thank Sandy Johnson for the great work he has been doing for the board and at these AGMs preparing the minutes. So thank you, Sandy. Okay, if somebody could make the motion to approve last year's minutes of the AGM, be appreciated. Thank you, Karen. Appreciate that.
Do we need her to unmute or just raise hand okay?
Yeah, let's say it actually is better for the recording.
So Karen, if you could unmute and just give your verbal.
Yes, I can move to adopt the minutes from.
Great, thank
last
you.
year.
And if somebody could second Karen's motion.
I'll
Joel,
second that.
seconds.
Everyone.
So you got the individual?
No, I didn't.
Joel definitely said.
Joel?
Joel, okay, thank you, Joel.
That was the one name I made out.
Okay, so hearing no opposition, we'll consider the last year's minutes approved. Okay, so I'm just going to make a number of comments and remarks as we start the formalities of this meeting, and I'd like to basically reflect on the challenging and truly unique times for all of us as we respond and adapt to COVID-19 pandemic. It really is a period of time for all of us that we would never have thought of some 4 or so months ago. I think as we adjust and adapt to COVID, we are also dealing with some really significant realizations and perhaps ugly truths about systemic racism that we're dealing with and facing as a society, and how we treat our minorities. And of course, Indigenous peoples, Blacks, people of color, women, and the poor. And it is something for me on a personal level that I've given a lot of thought to, and I'm sure everybody else out there has done the same. I think more specifically, we as an organization and as individuals have to acknowledge that the history of conservation and the creation of parks is really tied very closely to our colonial past, and which has involved here in Canada the dispossessing of Indigenous peoples of their homelands, culture, and economy. I think there are a lot of examples over the last 100 years, places like Banff, Jasper, Kluane here in the Yukon, Wood Buffalo in northern Alberta and the NWT, in America and the US, Yellowstone, Yosemite, the Grand Canyon, and internationally places like the Serengeti and Kruger National Parks. They're all examples of original peoples being dispossessed of their lands. And I think that while here in the north, we've had the settlement of land claims and efforts of reconciliation that have started to address this past, I think it's fair to acknowledge that there still remains a lot to do. And CPAWS Yukon has and will continue to work, support with First Nations on conservation initiatives here in the territory, and we will continue to listen and be engaged. I think it is fair to acknowledge that we've learned much from our campaigns in the past, such as protecting the Peel Watershed and the Porcupine caribou herd. And we're going to continue to build on this experience to do better. I also recognize that there is a need for greater diversity, particularly on our board, and we will continue to work with other board members to try to change this. Reflecting on the past year, the chapter has achieved much and remains financially well positioned to do our work for the current fiscal year. However, we have to realize that the outlook for the future is less certain, and it depends very much on the financial health of our funders and how we come out of this period of pandemic. So As I wrap up these comments and remarks, I'd like to, on behalf of the board, thank Chris and staff for your continued commitment, leadership, and hard work to furthering conservation by laying the groundwork to protect Yukon's incredible wilderness areas and biodiversity. And I say laying the groundwork in recognition that so much of what we do in collaboration with others, and that we make contributions to these efforts, and we work in unison with others. I also want to acknowledge and thank all the board members for your unwavering support and involvement, and especially to thank Gail and Dan as you both stepped down from the board. I would say that your sage insights and commitment to the mission of the chapter are very much appreciated. So with those thoughts in mind, I'm going to now hand it over to Judith, who's going to review our financial statements for last year and our budget for this year.
Okay, I'm just going to share my screen. So just give me one moment here. Okay. So the financial statements are the important financial document that has to be approved by the membership during this meeting. As the past years, our auditor, the accountant this year was Mackay and Associates, the Vipers firm here. The financial statements were posted on the website. I'm not sure if anyone has had a chance to look at them before this meeting, but there was the chance. So the management responsibility statement will be signed by the executive director and states that we are fulfilling our responsibilities. And then the next page is the auditor's report, where they give their opinion. There were no, yeah, it's just a basic thing. There were no issues that they found throughout the audit. And it kind of just covers their liability things. The most important part of, or one of the most important parts of the statement is the statement of operations. So here it shows our revenues and our expenses, and then lower down, obviously, the balance at the end of the year. It always compares it to the previous fiscal year end. And just to scroll down to the bottom right away, excess of revenue over expenses, you see here that we had $31,656 surplus at the end of the year. That is very nice to see, as we had anticipated a deficit of about $195,000 last year during the AGM. Thanks to, and then $195,000 in deficits would then be covered by our surplus from the past fiscal years. So we wouldn't, we wouldn't be in the red necessarily. And we had, well, we can show now this excess, so the surplus due to lower expenses in our past fiscal year, 2019-2020. Most program expenses were lower than we had anticipated. Part of that is due to the fact that we didn't receive any pathway funding, which meant a slight change of focus for some of our programming. We also have hired a new full-time position, the Conservation Science Coordinator. Her name is Kate. We'll meet her later during this meeting. She started later than we had anticipated. And then we were also lucky that we received a few new grants, which meant that not only our expenses were lower, but our revenue was actually a little bit higher than anticipated. So thanks to all of that, we show just over $31,000 surplus at the end of the year. Does anyone have any questions about any specifics of the statements as shown? If you do, please unmute yourself and ask the question, please. Okay, we'll move on. There will be another chance to ask questions before we move to approve the statements. Another part of the statement is the statement of financial position. It shows our assets and our liabilities. So you'll see that our, our net assets are at the bottom here are slightly higher compared to last fiscal year. If you look up here, that's mostly due to the fact that our term deposit went up quite a bit by adding funds to our reserve fund. And you also see that there's a decrease in accounts payable and the liabilities that we accrued. As well as our mortgage loan, you'll see that we paid off quite a bit this past fiscal year. So thanks to that, our net assets have gone up a little bit compared to last year. So yeah, all in all, we're in a very good financial position this year and ready for our next fiscal year. Then the last page I want to show is just the statement of cash flows. It's just the ins and outs that happened throughout the 2019-2020 year. They'll give you an overview. I'm just going to scroll back up to the statements themselves, or the statement of operations, I should say. Yeah, and then, so that is the part of the audited statements that they want to present. And then just a little bit more about our financial position more in general. So the reserve fund, so that's the term deposit here, the $221,000. That's the amount that we had at the end of our fiscal year, March 2020. That is still our target of 3 months of operational expenses in the reserve fund. Our longer term goal is to have 6 months available. That's just a good financial management for any organization. And some of the surplus that we show in the statement of operations will be added to this reserve fund to add to that. Yeah, I said the access to unrestricted cash is very important for any nonprofit organization, especially in the current uncertain times. A financial downturn in the market could mean that fundraising from foundations might become more difficult, and our reserve fund can help us bridge some of those gaps when needed, or if needed, hopefully not when. Then the house, so that is yeah, included in our capital assets and the mortgage payment. So you see the mortgage payment that we now have is just under $39,000. So we expect to pay that off this calendar year. And some of the surplus that is shown in the statement of operations will be used to pay the mortgage off as well. And then this is a bit of a repeat from last year's AGM, where we first mentioned that we are looking into opportunities and challenges for a new office space to keep protection of the assets of our house. It's an older building, and we know the asset will go down over time. So we try to secure that by looking into new opportunities. We have a housing committee that is working on that. They have met a few times throughout the year. And we have had conversations with potential partners. And we hope to move forward with this project within the next 2 or 3 years. So for now, it's just a note to remind you of that idea that we have, and that before we can actually start and move on any specific option that we have in mind, we have to go through a membership engagement process as laid out in our bylaws. And then a quick note about investments. We're still working on with the investment committee. A few board members and some staff are involved in that. They have met throughout the year a couple of times. We're still in the process of finalizing our investment policy and hope to do that later this year. So for now, our investment is in the house and in short-term GICs, the term deposits that's shown on the statements. And we're looking to diversify that a little bit in the future so that the policy will define how we'll do that. Yeah, that's all the notes I wanted to share about the audited statements. And then I will just stop sharing my screen and ask Adele to put the slide up for people to move to approve the financial statements.
Yeah, so motion to approve the financial statements. If you could click.
Someone will need to move it.
Yes, someone
Yes.
does it.
Okay, so on the assumption that there are no additional questions for Judith, and we'll take a moment just to make sure that that's the case. All righty, so could I have a motion from the floor to approve the 2019-20 audited financial statements as presented?
I see that Gail has her hand raised. Could you unmute yourself to verbally move this motion?
Yes, I'll move it.
Thank you, Gail, appreciate that. And if someone could second that motion, much appreciated, please.
I can second it.
That's Heather.
Karen.
Oh, excuse me, Karen, thank you. All right, hearing no opposition, we'll consider the motion passed and approved.
I think we're gonna do a vote.
Are we doing the vote?
I don't know if we're gonna do both.
Oh, well, I guess that's the all in favor thing, but we can also do the non-opposed one. Yeah, I'm not sure. Maybe we didn't think it's true. All in favor, sure. No. Well, I see lots of green check marks popping up, so that shows me that all are in favor, or at least the majority is.
Thanks, everyone, and thanks for bearing with us as we figured this out. You'd never guess that we haven't done this before.
Definitely not. Okay,
Okay, so we have a majority of support for this motion.
we do.
Okay, very good. Thank you, everybody.
So I'll go and share my screen again to show you the budget. Bear with me while I find my spotlight again. There we go. So we created a budget for this fiscal year, and I'm just trying to figure out how I can navigate. I don't know how to scroll left or right. Sorry. I don't know how to make it so I can see the whole thing. Yeah, it's a bit small, but this is the full budget that I can show. I'm not sure if you can zoom it in on your own screen, but it might be a little bit easier to read. So this draft budget for 2020-21, so the fiscal year we're currently in, shows an optimistic picture for our organization. Back in April, when COVID just really started to hit here in the Yukon, we created a bare bones budget with this situation in mind. Especially because we expected a market downturn in the near future or in a further away future. That possibility still exists. And for that reason, we created this bare bone budget that was very minimal on programming expenses. We're very grateful to the foundations that have committed to support us in this fiscal year. And we will also apply for some Canadian emergency wage subsidy funding from the federal government to fill or help fill the gap that we showed in our budget. So you can see that here under HR grants, there's about $70,000 that we hope to receive from the government to bridge that gap. The ones here, the grants total, all the ones that are marked in green are ones that we already are confident of that we receive, since we have received the yes from the foundation or government agency. So in total, we have just over $430,000 in grants that have already been approved in our budget, and $160,000 in grants that we know that we will get an invitation for later this year. That means that we have about $590,000 of the $658,000 of new revenue amounts already confirmed for this year. That's about 90%. So that's a very nice position to be in at this time of year. So this first page that we're looking at shows all the revenues. You'll see that we always have some deferrals from our past fiscal year, and we expect to defer some money to the next fiscal year. That's just based on the grant cycles from the foundations. Then scrolling down to the expenses, of course, we have staff that we pay. We have various program expenses. And then we have campaign support and operational expenses. And operational expenses is mostly office-related expenses to keep the society going. So our current budget doesn't show an addition to our reserve fund. We know this is not an ideal situation to be in, as we're still working towards the 6 months of operating expenses. So we will move money to our reserve fund if we can at the end of this current fiscal year. Some program expenses may not happen this year due to the COVID-19 situation. We have some travel expenses in there, and we're just not sure if they can take place. So we may see a decrease of revenues and or expenses over the course of the year. But overall, as you'll see here, it's a balanced budget. The net income of $39,000 is the $39,000 that we put into our mortgage, so that balances to zero. So for this fiscal year, we still have a very optimistic picture. However, we do have some uncertainties for our 21-22 fiscal year due to the pandemic. There is still a possibility for a market downturn or financial crisis. And if this happens, it will most likely have an effect on our foundation revenues and maybe on government grants as well. The foundations that have committed to support us this year made commitments in their books before the pandemic hit. And so for this reason, we think that our next year fiscal year budget might be more heavily impacted. Yeah, when we started to build our current budget, so the one that you're looking at now, we had identified a need for new foundation grants to support our growing team. And we anticipated it will be a lot harder this year to find new foundations due to the uncertain times we're in. So we will start to look ahead to our next fiscal year and maybe the year after this summer. And our goal is to keep working on our campaigns on a level that is required to do the work we need to do, and also to continue the fiscal health of our organization. Are there any questions about the budget? You can see a larger version on the website too. Is there anything in the chat about the budget? Let's see, 7 messages.
Alrighty, so hearing no questions, could I ask for a motion from the floor to approve the 2020-21 budget?
I see Jill puts a check mark yes. Could you unmute yourself to move the motion?
There we go. I was trying to unmute. Yep, I can make the motion.
Thanks, Jill.
Hi, Jill.
Hi. Hello, hello.
Hello.
It's Wendy. I can second that motion.
Great, thanks, Wendy. Okay, so we'll take the approach of taking a vote. So if everybody could please vote, and we'll make sure we have a majority of support.
Very pretty.
We're good?
We're good. We have 75%.
Okay, great. Thank you, everybody. Okay. Judith, did you want to talk a little bit about our appointment of our auditors for next year?
That's later.
Yeah, that comes later, sorry.
Does it? Okay.
We decided.
So this is after you present, Chris?
Yeah.
All right. I thought it was all sort of financial
No,
stuff.
we're mixing things up.
Okay. Okay, so now it's over to Chris, our executive director, who's going to provide some remarks. And Chris is not the dog that you see, although sometimes we get greater direction from that pooch. But anyway, go ahead, Chris.
Thanks, Eric. I'll try not to be too insulted by that. He's a very smart dog, though. Hi, everyone. Thank you to all of you for deciding to take the time to join us tonight. And thanks to the team who worked so hard to make this most unique of AGMs possible, especially Adil and Judith, who put lots of work into figuring out how all of this would work. I have to say, I think this might be the most difficult executive director's update that I've ever had to prepare for. And normally I would give myself some bullet points and just sort of talk to you a little bit more casually. But this year, I feel like there's a lot to cover and I don't want to miss anything. So I'm going to read from my notes. So I hope you don't mind. It really seems weird to say this, but it was only last August that 83% of the Peel watershed was officially marked for protection. That is only 7 months ago. It was the culmination of 20 years of work for CPAWS Yukon. And by all rights, this AGM should be a really big celebration for us. But I mean, it honestly doesn't feel right because since that time, so much has changed. August feels like an age ago. In March, COVID-19 took the rug from under our feet and it changed the world in ways that we're barely beginning to understand. Some of those changes are positive. Many people have begun to reevaluate the things that are most important, and that has included our relationship with nature. But there's also so much to mourn. And at the same time, we're all reckoning with the systemic racism that exists, both around us and within us. And I want to thank Eric for sharing his thoughts on that topic. Over the past year, Anne and Jody have been running a series of internal trainings for us that they called Getting Ready for Reconciliation. It covered topics like white supremacy and white fragility, and they helped us to challenge our biases and confront some uncomfortable truths. I want to especially thank Anne and Jody for all of their hard work in putting that together and pushing us to have those conversations. We genuinely still have a long way to go in this, but I'm grateful that the conversation is at least one that we've started. I know I still have a hell of a lot to learn, and I know that I'm going to make mistakes, but I'm committed to leaning into the uncomfortable conversations so that I can be the best leader to the team possible and the best ally that I can be. We're in a time of change right now. We're literally living through the pages of a history book. It doesn't feel like a time to celebrate, and yet here we have a lot to be thankful for. For CPAWS Yukon, the last year has been it's actually been a really good one. And I want to take some time to acknowledge that. It's remarkable to think that it's only a handful of years ago that in this office we were 4 people working on a single campaign.
And now that campaign has moved further, or that has moved further than I could have imagined. And including our two wonderful summer students, we have 10 people working on a wide variety of projects, all focused on protecting the Yukon's wilderness. And I especially want to note that we haven't been building a team for the sake of building a team. We've been building a team because we've had to, because there's just been so much work to do. And I mean, that alone is exciting. After the conclusion of the formal proceedings, you're going to have a chance to hear from the team, and they'll tell you a bit more about what each of them is working on. But I do want to take a moment to share a few highlights, use the opportunity that I have to boast a little bit about the folks we have here. Last August, Randy canoed in the Beaver River watershed with some filmmakers, some photographers, and Nacho citizens. Following the trip, they made 2 short films, and those films have helped raise awareness of the region for people across the Yukon. The road in the Beaver River watershed is still not being built, and we're going to continue doing everything we can to support that community as they work to oppose it. In December, Malcolm and I had the opportunity to travel to Toronto with representatives from Buntuk Gwitchin First Nation and the Gwitchin Tribal Council. We met with the big banks moving from skyscraper to skyscraper. We asked them to commit to never funding development in the Arctic Refuge. Although the pandemic has made it difficult for the banks to prioritize this in recent months, we do remain hopeful that at least one will move forward with it in the near future, following the lead of so many banks in the United States. This year, Randy and Kate have together led a campaign to mobilize community members to participate in the Mineral Development Strategy consultations, a process that could actually really make a big difference in determining the future of mining here in the Yukon. I'm so proud of the 7 recommendations that the team put together, and particularly the way that they balance practical, common sense changes with a strong vision for a better future. Please make sure to check out these recommendations if you haven't had a chance already. They're on our website, and participate if you haven't done so already. Kate and Randy will be holding a webinar in a few weeks to present on those recommendations, and I highly recommend you join that because they both do a really great job explaining it. None of the work we do would be possible without the support of Anne and Jody, our community outreach team. Both of them bring great strength and wisdom to the organization, and I've been so impressed as they've navigated the challenges of running a community outreach program when there aren't any communities that we can actually travel to. We have 2 summer interns at the moment, Megan and Rhiannon. Both are working on some really exciting projects, and they're going to tell you a little bit about those later. They're both brilliant, and we're so lucky to have them working with us this year. I want to acknowledge the work that Adil has done to lead our communications as we've navigated through this pandemic. He has consistently found the right message and the right tone at the right time. One of my goals when I started at CPAWS was to make sure that our communications were as good as any other organization in the world. And I think the last few months, Adil has proved that they are. It's a privilege to work with you, Adil, and I'm so grateful that we've had you here to navigate us through these difficult times. I also want to thank Judith for all of her hard work this year. The last 6 months have probably been the most difficult I've ever had in my career. Trying to steer the ship during a pandemic, keeping our work moving forward, and protecting people's jobs has been complicated. The budget that you saw today is at least the 6th iteration that Judith has built for us since the pandemic broke. Excuse me, I'm getting a dry throat. Judith has been a rock, and we're so lucky to have you with us, Judith. Finally, as I do these acknowledgements, I'd like to acknowledge the 2 board members who have decided to step down this year. Gail has been CPAWS Yukon's treasurer for many, many years. As an accountant, she's brought so much insight and wisdom. I know that Gail has been wanting to step down. I apologize for this frog in my throat. I usually don't talk for this long uninterrupted. It's not that kind of office. I know that Gail has been wanting to step down for many years, but every year she's agreed to stay on for just 1 more year. Thank you, Gail. And I'm glad that you'll be leaving us in such good hands. Dan joined the board more recently, but in the time he's been with us, he's been a huge asset, frequently asking me the difficult questions that have helped me make better decisions. He has also brought a wealth of knowledge on parks and protected areas. Thank you, Dan, and I do hope that one day you decide to come back. No pressure though. Now is the time where I like to acknowledge some of the important people outside of our organization. And this year, I think I have to acknowledge a number of people. First is Jerry and Mary Whitley. From almost the first, this is really embarrassing. I'm sorry, bro. From almost the first day I joined CPAWS, I realized the important role that they both play in our conservation community. Jerry was a hydrologist, and they first moved up so that he could take a job at the Farron mine. But he has also long been an amateur pilot. He's used both of these skills to help organizations like CPAWS and the Yukon Conservation Society, flying his plane to remote regions of the territory to get aerial photographs that show the impacts of mining and other developments on our wilderness. As a member of the organization Lighthawk, he was committed to never charging for these flights. I once asked him why he does it, and besides the passion for conservation, he told me that he just loves flying, and it's even better when he has somewhere special to fly to. Both Mary and Jerry are people I'm grateful to know, and I feel lucky to be a part of their community. I'm speaking a little bit more of Jerry today, though, because earlier this year, he moved into supported living at Whistlebank Continuing Care Facility. Mary has updated me today that he's doing well there. He's being really well looked after, and he's on the Wind River ward or wing, which is certainly a place I would like to spend my days. My thoughts are with both Mary and Jerry as they settle in. As they settle into this new situation. I'd also like to speak tonight about Jessie Germain, who is a feisty woman with boundless energy. Jessie was one of the participants on the trip into the Beaver River Watershed. As a Nacho Naik elder, the trip represented an opportunity for her to experience a part of her community's traditional territory and to see some of the landscape she had previously only heard about. Her positive outlook and outgoing personality turned her into one of the stars of the Beaver River Watershed documentaries. The journey into the watershed proved to also become a journey into her past, as they came upon signs of her ancestors along the river, including an old cabin. The excitement that Jessie felt while exploring that cabin and the strong connection she felt with her ancestors was palpable, and it came through clearly when you watched that film. Her past helped provide a foundation for the future that she wanted to see for the area. She wanted to protect the land and not see that road built through the beautiful landscape she called home. Once she said, if they try to build that road, I'm going to sit in the middle until they give up. And I think she would have to. In April this year, Jessie passed away from a stroke. She was far too young. The fact that she had the opportunity to venture into that landscape To spend time connecting with our ancestors is something that we're all going to treasure. And with that, I want to thank you for listening. It's been a really difficult year, but one filled with moments of joy and hope. I want to close with a quote from my friend Jerry Lee. It's something I've stolen from my Facebook, so I kind of hope she doesn't mind. She said, "Let's get uncomfortable. Let's make history. Let us be the ones that the future generations talk about, who flipped the broken systems and turned it into something better. It's going to be uncomfortable, guaranteed. It's so worth it." Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. Maybe we can take a moment, and if there's any queries or questions from the members for Chris, now would be a good time to raise them.
Jalen says thanks for your strong leadership. No, thank you.
We're good?
Yeah.
Good.
We're moving on.
So we're going to move on, and we're going to talk a little bit about the auditors for next year. And Judith, take it away.
Well, it's very short. As I mentioned when I started the presentation of the audited statements, McKay and Associates have worked with us for the past number of years. This year, again, it was a very smooth process. We're very happy with the work they do. We have a good working relationship with them. And for that reason, I would like to put a motion forward to appoint the same firm, McKay and Associates, as the auditor for our 2020-21 fiscal year. So again, we're hoping that someone can make that motion if they are in favor of this. I see Gerald has his hand raised. Could you unmute yourself? And
yeah, sure. You're looking for a mover for that motion?
correct, yes.
I hereby move that we appoint McKay and Associates for the 2021 fiscal year.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. And then we'll have a seconder for the motion, please.
Heather seconds the motion.
Thank you, Heather. And now we'll take a vote on that motion, please.
Well, we're good.
Great, we have a majority. Thank you, everybody. And now, Louis, are you still with us?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you, Louis. Good to hear your voice.
Perfect. Sounds good. We now come to the election of directors for CPAWS Yukon. The way it's set up, the CPAWS Yukon can have up to 9 non-Indigenous board members, with the 10th spot reserved for an Indigenous person. We have 5 returning directors, and we have 2 people who have put their names forward who are considered new directors. I'm not that technologically savvy with Zoom and my internet connection, so can people see that?
Eric, sorry, Louis Adil is savvy, so he's got it up on the screen already.
Yes, perfect, excellent, good, okay. Thank you, Adil. We should have perhaps coordinated this. But anyway, so we've got Eric Val, Sandy Johnson, Karen McKenna, Heather Switson, and Joel Lewis, who are considered returning directors. And I believe we have 2 new names put forward. That is Wendy Morrison and Matthias Perdon. Are they online?
I am. Wendy is.
Sure. Wendy, do you want to give like a 1 or 2 minute quick sort of bio of yourself?
I can. So until a year ago, I was the operations manager at CPAWS Yukon, a role that I enjoyed very much. And I moved on to start a company to build organizational effectiveness within Yukon NGOs. So just trying to do some good work for the sector in the Yukon. I'm thrilled to be kind of working with the CPAWS team again in this capacity. And it's good to see everyone.
Great, thank you, Wendy. Is Matthias online?
No, he isn't at the moment. He was planning to be out of Whitehorse, and he thought he would be within range of being able to call in, but I guess he isn't. So anyway, unfortunately, he isn't.
Karen, could you say a few words about Matthias and his interest and his background for the other members? I should say that Matthias has been involved in our latest board meeting and had a chance to introduce himself and describe his interest in joining. And perhaps if Karen, if you could just sort of reflect on that for the other members.
Okay, so Matthias moved to the Yukon about 4 years ago, and I've known him since he moved here. He was a friend of my kids when they were at Carleton University. So he moved here. He has a master's in, I don't have his information right in front of me. I should have had it, but he does have a master's in environmental conservation of some respect. And he's been working as for an engineering firm doing, helping them do planning and proposals and things. And he's now working as a planner with another company in Whitehorse. And he's very keen on enabling the backcountry of Yukon to enabling making more of our Yukon backcountry available, remaining in an undisturbed manner, so that wildlife and people and wildlife and can survive for the future. Anyways, something like that. But I wish I had his information in front of me, but I can't find it. He did give us a resume and why he wanted to join CPAWS, and I don't have that information right in front of me, unfortunately.
It's okay. He sounds wonderful. Okay, so we've got the existing slate. We've got the two new names put forward, Wendy and Matthias. I'm going to ask, is there anyone else who is interested in putting forward their name to be on the board of directors? You can either verbally unmute yourself and say you want to be, or you can use the chat function. Is there anyone else out there who wants to be on the board of directors?
Hi there, this is Jill. I would be willing or interested to come back on the board, but I'm good either way. So it depends if there's others interested. We could leave it until the fall and see if there's more interest or whatever. I just thought I'd put it out there.
Okay, thanks, Jill. That's great. Thank you for that. Is there anyone else out there who's interested in being on the board of directors? I'll ask a third time and final time. Is there anyone else out there who wants to be on the board of directors? Okay, so what I propose we do is I'll read off the names and we'll vote all of them in at once. We won't do a separate vote based on names. So we've got Eric Val, Sandy Johnson, Karen McKenna, Heather Switson, Joel Lewitt, Wendy Morrison, Matthias Purdon, and Jill Penguin. Is that, no one else wants to put their name forward?
Are we on mute?
No, we're on mute.
Okay.
Louis, I just see that Noel has a green check mark. I'm not sure if that means he's putting his name forward or if he's voting. He just removed it. So
I was voting for Jill.
okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you, Noel.
Thanks, Noel.
Good to see keen early support. But how about we all vote now for the entire slate? That 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 names that I read out. So Eric, Sandy, Karen, Heather, Joel, Wendy, Matthias, and Jill. If you're in favor, please vote yes now. Okay, looks like we've got a majority. Perfect, thank you so much. I understand that the way the CPAWS board operates, at their first board meeting, they'll decide who becomes president, vice president, treasurer, and secretary in order to be in compliance with the Societies Act and that sort of stuff. Have I missed anything, Judith, Adil?
Louis, I think you've covered it all, and you're quite right that at our next board meeting that we'll be determining the officer positions of those 8 members now that sit on the board. Louis, I want to thank you, and I want to let you know that I was very worried about your circumstances because as I see you, there's this bookshelf behind you with all kinds of books. And my question was, does he have that bookshelf properly anchored to the wall? Because it looks like it might fall down on you at any moment. So are you safe?
Yes and no. I once squeezed too many books in and I almost brained myself with a very large illustrated copy of the Kama Sutra. Too complicated to explain all the details. I'll explain it to you over a coffee or something. Yeah, anyway, congratulations on your new board.
Thank you, Louis. Okay, at this point, it sort of marks the end of our formal proceedings. Again, I want to thank everybody for coming out in a Zoom form for this year's AGM and providing us your support. Now, I believe we need a motion to adjourn the meeting. Is that correct? And so with that in mind, could somebody raise that motion to adjourn the meeting?
I can raise that motion. It's Jill.
Thanks, Jill. And then a seconder, please.
Happy to second from Gerald.
Okay, great. Thank you. And then we'll take a vote just to make sure that the meeting is indeed ended.
Majority of the people are done with this meeting.
Great. So now I'm going to pass this over to Chris to organize the staff presentations.
No one told me I'd have to organize this. Thanks, Eric. So one of the things we found really has been most meaningful for people at the AGM each year is once we shut down these formal proceedings, for everyone to just have a chance to hear and interact directly with the staff. And so basically, normally it's a little bit more informal than the main bit. So I welcome people to take yourselves off mute and ask questions and take the chance to sort of meet the team and engage with them as they go through and they tell you about their programs. If you want, you can drop off, but you would miss some really great content. So I recommend you stick around and hear what everyone's working on. And so we'll go over to the stuff, kicking off with Malcolm. Can we spotlight Malcolm? Yeah, we can.
Hey, everybody. I guess to start this off, I wanted to share a short animation that I just finished working on. So if you're following, we released a report on the ecological impacts of roads, especially resource roads, last month. And while we hope that people and policymakers will dig into the report, we recognize that a lot of folks don't have the time to do that. So we thought that it would be a fun way to condense some of the key messages into a fun animation. So it was an exciting project to work on. And we just published it on our Facebook just as the AGM started. And if you all want to share the video after we all adjourn tonight, that would be a great way to make sure that more eyes see this message. And also, we'll briefly add that it really, some of the recommendations from this road report really tie into the work that Randy and Kate and everybody else on the mineral development strategy team have been doing, especially the recommendation around finishing land use plans before making decisions about transformative projects like roads and other developments. So yeah, if you want to cue it up, Adele. Looks like that's me again. So on the Arctic Refuge, I think as you may know, the US government is still working on their environmental review process to authorize a lease sale for the coastal plain of the Arctic Refuge, the calving ground of the Porcupine caribou herd. And last September, the US government released their final environmental impact statement, which was a really poorly done document that failed to recognize the terrible impacts that drilling in the Arctic Refuge would have on the Porcupine caribou herd and all the people that depend on the herd. But since then, there's really been radio silence from the US government, which has been good news. They have still stated on a number of occasions that they hope to hold a lease sale this year, but still they haven't released their record of decision, which is something that they have to do before they start the ball rolling to set up a lease sale. And while we're optimistic that will keep getting delayed, we're ready for it to come out and take the necessary steps if and when the US government makes the next move in their attempt to open the Arctic Refuge to oil and gas development. But in the meantime, while we've been waiting on the US government, we have been being proactive by working on other issues. So for example, there's been a lot of amazing work done in the US that's been led by the Gwich'in Steering Committee and the Sierra Club that have been successful in getting 5 out of the 6 largest banks in the US to come out in opposition to drilling in the refuge and to pledge not to provide any finance to companies that would harm the Porcupine caribou herd, which is great news. And we've been hoping to build that similar momentum in Canada. So yeah, as Chris mentioned, we were able to travel to Toronto in December to hold meetings with some of Canada's largest banks, which was a great first step. And we're looking to for more ways to keep the pressure on them, which obviously has been complicated by the COVID situation. But we're in close coordination with the Atlantic Gwich'in and their caribou coordinator, Elizabeth Staples, who's been a huge help. And optimistic that we'll have more good news to share in the coming year on that. And I'm happy to answer questions on the Arctic Refuge, or if you want to hold your questions to the end, whatever works for you.
And just a reminder that if anyone would like to, just feel free to unmute yourself and speak at any time.
Sorry, but just very briefly, I guess I want to share that I find this pretty disconcerting that the Canadian banks are being quiet on this. Thanks for your work on that, guys. And I don't know what we have to do, but maybe maybe a lot more visibility. Maybe a lot more people need to know about this. I'm not sure. Thoughts, Malcolm?
Yeah, I don't really know what goes on in the minds of banking executives. So it's been a tricky campaign to strategize around, because the whole world of financial advocacy has been something we've had to learn and figure things out along the way. I guess on the US side, the first meetings with US banks was over a year before before Goldman Sachs came out with their policy. So I guess it takes a while for those decisions to be made. And it was sort of, I guess, the first that they were hearing from us on this issue in December. So while we're optimistic and some banks seem to be more open to it than others, I find it hard to really judge how long to know before we're hitting walls, if that makes sense. But we're brainstorming other ideas, or for example, to reach out to the Van City, which may be a more naturally allied institution, and to see if they would get out in front of this. And another idea has been to pressure the US subsidiaries of some of these Canadian banks. And if we can collaborate with a group like the Sierra Club, they obviously can have a lot more members than CPAWS Yukon does, and would be able to generate a level of public pressure that our chapter can't. Those are some of the ideas that we have been working through. Thanks for the question.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that. I think that's a great idea, your Van City idea. If there were just a little, you have to gain momentum, I guess, somehow. That could be an avenue to pursue, a little crack in the Canadian bank situation. Thanks.
For sure. Yeah. Thanks, Gerald.
Go to the next one. Keep it moving. Randy.
All right, Randy here. It's good to see everyone, even if it is just virtually. I'm going to give an update on 3 of our campaigns. The first one being the mineral development strategy, which is a campaign that's keeping us really busy. We've got a large team working on it. And the name doesn't really give it away, but what it is really this big opportunity to actually reshape mining in the Yukon. I think it's a rare opportunity, but a meaningful one. So what this strategy is going to be a document that at a very high level guides the territory's approach to managing mining. And this process came out of the mining memorandum of understanding that Yukon government signed with the self-governing First Nations. And that memorandum was signed to reset the way mining is done in the territory, to respect the final agreements, and to improve sustainability, environmental sustainability, how that's considered during mining. And so this document, it's being created by an independent 3-person panel. And they're operating at arm's length from government, and they're looking for input from the public, organizations like CPAWS, Yukon Conservation Society, Chamber of Mines, all sorts of folks, as well as First Nations, the self-governing First Nations, those without final agreements, as well as transboundary. And so what we've done is really focused in on what we've considered 7 key recommendations. I mean, a lot of these we've kind of had in our back pocket for years. And we just there hasn't been that window to push them forward. I'm not gonna be able to do them justice. I'll quickly read through those recommendations. I mean, the first one, I'd say the most critical, is developing successor mining legislation. So replacing the Quartz Mining Act and the Placer Mining Act. The second being to complete land use planning before we make decisions about transformative projects like big hard rock mines, like roads. So Malcolm's Road campaign ties in really well. The third, to pause while land use planning is going on. Right now, the Dawson land use plan is going on. Staking is still permitted. We saw what happened in the Peel. Fourth recommendation is to better separate mining promotion, regulation, and enforcement in Yukon government. And we've got making sure mining activities align with our commitments to climate action and biodiversity conservation. Our sixth recommendation is integrating the mitigation hierarchy into project assessment. So mitigation hierarchy, it's jargony, I know. We've characterized it as 4 steps for the land. So avoiding harm, minimizing harm, restoring what was damaged or what was impacted, and then offsetting what impacts you weren't able to avoid, and to ensure projects leave a positive legacy rather than this sort of gradual erosion of the things that we value about the Yukon. And then our final recommendation is to get a better understanding of the full economic costs and benefits of mining, and not just relying on a very simplified picture of GDP. So that's it in our recommendations in a nutshell. So what we've done, we've met with that independent panel over Zoom, had a meeting. We've posted our slides and the written submission on our site. And we are really pushing public engagement with this campaign on social media and reaching out to people. It looks like public engagement, I believe, is going to end at the end of July. The panel hasn't set dates yet. Everything is in flux because of COVID. But the one thing we're doing next is hosting an online event next Thursday. You can see on the left-hand side. We've have quite a few people signed up for that. I'm excited for that event, and we're going to go through our 7 recommendations. Kate and I are going to do that, and Adil is also going to let people know how they can amplify their voice, how they can, I guess, most effectively provide input to that process. And we're going to follow up with a Q&A with CPAWS staff, and then we're also lucky enough that Louis and Sebastian from YCS are going to be joining us and get their expertise. And this is really a 2-part campaign. I mean, the first phase of the campaign is getting that strong strategy with strong recommendations, and that's going to be complete by spring 2021 is when the panel is aiming to have that complete. But then I think the even more important part is then actually holding Yukon government to account to commit to the recommendations. You know, I think some people have things like the financial advisory panel report in the back of their mind where a lot of work goes into coming up with a document and then it sits on a shelf. So we're very aware of that and view this as a really long-term campaign. Yeah, I'll leave it at that before I move on to the next one, but I'll see, I'm not sure if there's any questions. That was kind of a lightning fast description. Well, maybe I will move on to the Dawson land use plan and where we're at with that. So the Dawson land use plan, this is the regional plan that Yukon is working on now. I should say Yukon government and Trondikwichen First Nation are the parties engaged with this plan. And this started up basically right after the Peel plan was finalized. Obviously, this is a really different plan than the Peel. You know, the Dawson region has areas that are quite a bit more developed than the Peel. And people think, they hear Dawson and they think mining. So that's been always a communication challenge. But if you look at the boundary of this region, it extends up to Fishing Branch, the northern edge of it. And then the southern edge extends south, actually south of where the White River and the Yukon River meet. And within that region, there's lots of ecologically and culturally important areas, you know, the range of the 40-mile caribou. And so I think lots of conservation opportunities, especially in the north of the community of Dawson, and in the south, kind of the Ladue, White River region. I'm feeling really optimistic about that plan. I think Yukon government is taking a better approach than with the Peel plan. Not perfect, but better. With the Peel discussions, were sort of dominated by the Department of Energy, Mines and Resources, and this time around, at least, the Department of Environment also has a seat at the table. Trondikwichen First Nation are also doing really great work with, I'm forgetting the name now, with their kind of conservation or sustainability plan as well. So we've presented to the Commission last December, sort of our kind of key recommendations. There's public engagement last fall, and so we did all we could to boost those numbers. We featured the Dawson campaign at our holiday open house. Adil, if you switch to the next slide for me. We've also had Malcolm went out with Peter Mather into the Tetondaks and got some really stunning photos that we've been able to use for the campaign. And of course, this process, it's still moving forward, but it's been, like everything, kind of changed by COVID. There hasn't been a public meeting since December, I believe, for a few different reasons. The plan right now, I believe that they have a draft goals and objectives, but no draft plan yet. So expecting a draft plan sometime in the fall or the winter, and then we'll really ramp up our public engagement again once we see that draft plan. And I'll leave it at that for Dawson. I'm not sure if there's any questions. Oh, I see Jody's comment, love the socks. Yeah, I think that's a pretty Malcolm photo. All right, I will move on to the Beaver River Watershed, my final update. Like Chris said, went on a trip into the watershed last August. Joel Lewitt, our fearless board member, was there to guide the trip, and it was a wonderful experience to go out into the watershed and document it and share that with others through 2 films that were produced. And so we've had a really great event in Whitehorse, and we've been invited multiple times to show those films in the community of Mayo with the First Nation of Notchinayak Dun. And that's been really wonderful. Got to go to a youth culture camp in the spring and show the films to the youth, and just seeing them captivated was really great. And as Chris mentioned, it's very saddening to hear of Jessie Germain's passing. She was on that trip, and I got to know her fairly well on the trip, and she's just full of energy and fearless and kind, and that was a great part of this job, is the people you get to work with. So again, this campaign, we're running this campaign because of the threat of a proposed mining exploration road, and also other development in this watershed. There's a land use planning process that's going on, a sub-regional plan between Yukon government and the First Nation of Notchinayak Dun. It's been put on complete hold right now because of COVID-19. I'm not sure when that's set to restart, not for a little while. But I'm optimistic that with so many people standing up to this road that it's not going to go forward. And I guess one neat thing that's coming to this campaign, Keitha Clark, if you've heard her, she's a Yukon fiddler. She recently released an album called The Watershed. And she's used that album to raise awareness about the Beaver River watershed, and the press that she's given about that album, which was recently released. She's raised a lot of awareness about the campaign. So her album, it was on Indiegogo, but it will soon be up on her website and iTunes. It's not up yet, but if you go purchase it, all proceeds are going to CPAWS, which was incredibly generous of her. And it's a beautiful album to listen to. And I guess next steps, we have funding, or most of our funding in place for a youth trip for this summer. Of course, it's a little bit uncertain with COVID-19. Right now, we can't do an overnight youth trip, but hopeful that that can go ahead. To just seeing how youth were really captivated by those documentaries. It'd be great to get them out on the land and build some of those skills and that confidence, so they can go explore their traditional territory in the future. And I will leave it at that and let the next person do an update, or unless there's any questions.
Thanks, Randy and Malcolm. Great updates.
Thanks, Jill.
Hi. So this is communications. And if you've been following,
Spotlight back on you.
what's that? Oh, I have to put the spotlight on me. Right. Thanks, Chris. I feel like the spotlight's been on me a lot, especially as the person who kind of deals a lot with the communications. I feel like you've probably heard me enough over the past year, mainly because a lot of the stuff that you do here comes from me. So I wanted to take a moment to highlight some of the stuff that we've done that's made some press outside of our quote unquote our supporter base, like things in the media that aren't necessarily people who choose to engage with us, but people who are in the community and will continue to hear our voice as long as we have good things to say, or important things to say, I should say, because good is relative. And I think that middle picture is really telling, because it's when the Peel watershed, when the plan for the Peel watershed was signed, it was a historic moment for the Yukon, and I'm really happy to see Chris got his headshot in that picture as well. Even if it's directed straight at the sun. And I think that's a testament to all the hard work that's been done by this organization before I arrived, and then all the hard work I've seen staff put towards achieving that goal while I've been here. And a lot of that has to do with good storytelling and convincing communication strategies that have been implemented. So that's something I'm really happy about and really proud of. We see in the top left, Malcolm's reports getting some press coverage, and on the far right, our pop-up art shop getting some coverage, which I'm really happy about because it was kind of a spur of the moment idea that we had that first year when we did it. And it was tied to the Peel and to get people to provide their comments on the Peel campaign and on final consultations. And it kind of spurred into its own kind of cool thing for the city of Whitehorse and in our community to have a chance to give back to the artists that have helped us tell the story of the Peel over the past few years. And so that's really awesome. And then in the bottom left, I also wanted to include some not so great moments where we had to kind of stand up for ourselves with a lot of the foreign funding rhetoric that's going around in the country and a lot of the attacks that are happening on environmental organizations. And generally, I think it's nice to stay out of that spotlight as much as possible, but every now and then, I think it's good to be part of a team that is willing to stand up for ourselves, to take pride in what we do. And I have to say that the statement that we released did go through numerous iterations, and we worked really hard to make sure that it wouldn't get, there wouldn't be like outside reasons for it to be devalued or decredited. It was what it was, and every word in that statement had a purpose. And that's kind of what I also really value about this team is that I know you guys hear from me a lot and you hear what you may think are my words, but my words are accumulation of a lot of conversations with staff and a lot of teamwork and a lot of really awesome perspectives that everyone brings to the team. So yeah, that's just a little bit about communications specifically, and I'm going to stop talking now unless anyone has any questions. Thanks. Yeah. Next up, I think we have community outreach.
Yeah, Jody has to go to bed soon, so sorry, Ekam has to go to bed soon.
Oh yeah, so Jody, if you wanna, you are spotlighted.
Thanks, you guys. Oh, it's okay. I did unmute myself. Hey, thanks for that awesome slide. I guess I can hear myself, but I can't hear anybody else. So I will give you an update on CPAWS community outreach, which is done by not only me, but also my coworker, Anne. I'm just giving a little talk at our CPAWS AGM, and when I'm done, I'll right there. Yeah, so what we wanted to give you an update, and Anne, is it possible for Anne to speak while I'm speaking if she wants to pipe in? I don't know if it is, but.
Yeah, I just have to unmute it.
Okay, cool, okay, great. So I just wanted to say that our job, I mean, Anne and I, and the community, the outreach team, we weave in and out of most of the CPAWS campaigns. As Randy mentioned, there's a MDS team or Mineral Development Strategy team, and there's different teams for the different campaigns, and there's at least one of us on the outreach team is on each of those campaign teams. And our energy and focus will go where it's needed the most and where opportunities come up. So, for example, anytime that there's a public engagement, Anne and I will be very busy with that. When the Peel consultations were on, we traveled to most of the communities to make sure that people understood what was happening, why there was another consultation, why it was important to participate yet again. And so for the MDS, you know, when there's an opportunity for the public engaged, that's when we're really in there. And this year, it's very different, or at least since COVID. Some things are the same and some things are very different. So Anne and I both pick up the phone and get to talk to people in the communities and give them updates. That hasn't changed really, other than maybe having a little more space to do that. And then other things are different. You know, CPAWS as an organization will go to the communities anywhere from, you know, 3 or 4 to up to 8 times a year. The different staff going to different communities, and that's just I didn't actually count that. I'm just making a guess as to how many. So, you know, the last time we were able to go to a community, Anne and I were in Mayo at the end of January. And so, yeah, so that's, you know, not being able to plan those trips and having to figure out and get creative about what we can do is what we're doing now. Other things have become easier or different in good ways. We were able to organize a meeting with the First Nation of Nacho-Nagdan's lands department, and we all met on Zoom. That was a first, and that was really great. I think it was easier to schedule and hopefully you know, less of a burden for the lands department, and obviously for us, we didn't have to go all the way to Mayo to do that. So that was a good thing. We have put forward ideas to do outreach in communities that involve visiting people outside, which obviously really can only happen during the summer. So we'll see if that is able to happen, and we're hopeful that it is. But our job really is about connecting with people and connecting people to each other. And so we've really had to rethink how we can do that and come up with creative ways to be able to do that. And yeah, it's great. The whole organization is working together on that everywhere. Everything from infographics to Malcolm's awesome animation and to all the research that went into putting together this webinar that's happening on Thursday for the MDS on the 25th next week. So yeah, the whole CPAWS team is working to tackle this, and I think we're going to gain more new skills out of it in the end. So I just wanted to ask Anne, is there anything you wanted to add?
Well, in addition to the outreach, we also created the reconciliation workshop for staff, and we were getting ready to present it to the board and maybe national. But then COVID came, so that's all on hold, and it's not something that we can do through Zoom, just because of the sensitive nature of it. But yeah, other than that, yeah. So, and I've also been working on a protocol document that Jody and I will put out to the staff and the board soon. Yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah, that's been really great to have the opportunity to work with Anne on that. And last May, Anne and I were sent down for some training on reconciliation, along with someone from with the former ED at YCS, and we were really inspired and really affected by that workshop, and I've since been able to work together with Anne, and it's been really great to share and continue to learn through that. And I hope that we can host those workshops in the not too distant future. But yeah, that's a much trickier thing to do on video. I think that would be it, unless anybody has any questions. Cool.
Thanks, Jody and Ann. And
So
Kate, do you want to, Kate or Anne, I guess, have both been working on this, so invite you guys to speak about this course curriculum you're working on.
Okay, so I can start it. So a while back, we were approached by Norm Baricello from the Ross River Dena Council, and he was asking about a course curriculum for land stewardship. So Kate and I thought, well, yeah, that's probably something we can do. So we took a stab at it. And the course it's aimed at the young people of Ross River Dena Council specifically, although we're hoping that we can make it a transportable document that other First Nations can tap into. But through this program, we developed 8 modules, and we broke them down into looking at things of how do we manage the land, what do we manage, how do we obtain knowledge, how do we use our knowledge, why communication is important, and how to keep safe in the bush, and how to plan for the future. So we placed a lot of emphasis on offering it from the Ross River Dene perspective. So to do that, we had to go and look at the historical aspect of land stewardship, and there's a lot of information out there. So the big part of that was the reading of it. But in the end, the goal is that the youth who take this program would be able to go out onto the land using traditional knowledge towards hunting and fishing and land management and conservation, as well as looking at the scientific piece of it. So the combination of the two is what formulated this this curriculum for us, and we haven't had it approved or looked at by anybody yet. It's in Norm's hands, so once it goes from there, I guess we'll know. But yeah, so you can see the outline there. So I did modules 1 to 4 with help from Kate and staff, and Kate carried on and did modules 5 to 8 with help from everybody. And yeah, I presented the idea to a couple of the First Nations that I was in conversation with, Liard River First Nation and Selkirk First Nation, and they're interested in looking at this. So once we're able to tweak it up and have it approved somewhere, we'll see what we can do with it. So yeah, I think that's it. Kate?
Thanks, Anne. Yeah, I think this COVID period has really brought to the fore the importance of restoring our relationship with the land and with nature. So it has been exciting to work on this course curriculum with Anne. As Anne said, we are providing inputs on what technical skills land stewards might need for their on-the-land work. We're definitely emphasizing experiential and on-the-land learning, including because Ross River is advancing their Indigenous Protected and Conserved Area, or IPCA. And so these land stewards may end up working in that IPCA or in the lands department or for an environmental consulting company. So the course is not intended for people who might end up working in government, but rather stay within the Ross River Dena Council traditional territory. Part of the course has involved us trying to synthesize traditional knowledge in Western science, which is something that Norman Baricello has really emphasized. How are we going to integrate these multiple ways of knowing within the context of this course? So I was happy to meet Joe Copper-Jack, Yukon First Nation elder, who works at the Yukon Land Use Planning Council as their senior policy and planning advisor. Copper is on the line today, and I think he'll have some remarks after our staff updates. And so the stream that you see here is part of Copper-Jack's land and people's relationship model, and it's a way of visualizing how we might bring traditional knowledge and Western knowledge together, or rather how the two might regard each other as two banks of a stream that show each other respect and regard but don't necessarily meet. There are some other ways of visualizing that knowledge integration, such as the braids of sweetgrass. That's something that has been written about by an Indigenous scholar and scientist, Robin Wall Kimmerer. There's also two-eyed knowing, which I think Selkirk First Nation has also used as a way of describing the seeing of the world through two eyes, one with an emphasis on Indigenous knowledge, and the other Western science. And then that last diagram is a very Western, I think, visualization. It's a Venn diagram. The overlap area of TK and WS, or traditional knowledge and Western science, is that common ground with some space existing without overlap. So, you know, we've been thinking about this, and I hope we'll have time after staff updates to hear from Copper about the land and people's relationship model, which fits into this curriculum could fit into this curriculum quite nicely. So thank you.
Great. So we are lucky to have two awesome summer interns. And so I'd like to invite, let's go Megan and then Rhiannon. If you guys want to just introduce yourselves and what you're working on.
Okay, thanks. I'm Megan, and I feel really lucky to have gotten the conservation internship this summer with CPAWS. I just graduated from the University of Alberta program that they offer at the Yukon College, or now university, environmental and conservation science degree. And Dan was actually one of my professors this spring, so good to see you, Dan. So yeah, part of my position is to do a research project, and I'm going to be looking at the biodiversity of the McIntyre Creek area. So it'll be mostly using existing observational data from things like eBird and iNaturalist and the Conservation Data Center. And I also have some fisheries information, and I'd like to incorporate some cultural values as well to write a report and produce a map that would get the public engaged and draw people's attention to aspects of biodiversity that are often overlooked, and kind of, yeah, just bring people's attention to the biodiversity right outside their back door. And I was also really lucky to get the support of the Friends of McIntyre Creek group as well, who've been working to protect that area for quite a while. So that's my main focus this summer. I might be doing the CPAWS booth at the Fireweed Market later in the summer, but at this point we're just kind of waiting to see what the restrictions are like. So that's me. Thanks.
I'm muting myself. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you. Go ahead.
It's a little slow on this side, I think. My name's Rhiannon, and I'm a graduate student at Western University in Ontario. And I was really fortunate actually to be able to connect with Chris and learn about a project that Megan had come up with for the summer that needed some additional help. So I'm really lucky to be on board, and I'm really stoked to be able to work remotely from here. I'll be looking at access and using GIS to map access in game management subzones, and looking at the harvest of different game species in relation to the differing levels of access across the Yukon south of Dawson. So I literally just started this week, so this is really good timing, but I really look forward to working with you all.
Great. Thanks for all the updates.
Thanks. Does anyone have any questions at this point?
Oh, it all sounds great.
Thanks, Jill.
Well done, everybody.
Well, I guess at this point then, Kate, you mentioned that Joe Copperjack has a few things to say as well. So why don't we hand it over now?
Yeah, thanks, Joe, for being able to join us. And I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you for the CPAWS AGM to give me a chance to relationships with CPAWS. I had met with your board, I think it was last spring or last fall, and gave them a presentation which seemed to be well received on this land and people's relationship model that basically is a First Nation laws and using First Nation concepts and knowledge of how traditional knowledge or Indigenous knowledge can work together with Western science to address whether it be complex or easy issues regarding land and people. And since my presentation to your board last spring, The model has been doing very well in the sense of getting involved with various projects. It first started with the Southern Lakes Caribou Management Plan, which comprised of 9 different governments. And that's where I began the creation, design of the model, dealing with caribou, and then moving into moose or other hard sciences, going into soft science, tweaking it to address reconciliation, how governments and people can work together, how negotiations and mediation can deal with hard issues. And so since that time, I've been, the model has been invited to participate in some large projects. In regards to treaty negotiations, I've been invited to give a presentation to JFK Law, who handles a lot of treaty work for the BC First Nation peoples in regards to negotiations. I've been invited to participate in Arctic geoscience research projects that affects about 30 Inuit communities in regards to looking at the resilience of the peoples up there and how TK and Western science can work together. It was Katerina that promoted the model to IPCAs, and they're very interested in me giving them a presentation, which they're working on now of setting a date. The new mineral development strategy is interested in the model, so I'll be doing some work with them. Caribou in Schools, which is a project to produce guidebooks for teachers. The model is working in the schools. And next week on June 25th at 11 a.m. Yukon time, I will be given a presentation to the Canadian Institute of Planners, which I believe there's about 300 members across the country. And they're very interested also in the model and how it pertains to land use planning. And closer to home in regards to my day job as a senior policy and planning coordinator, which specializes in involving or how TK can work together with Chapter 11 in the common land use planning process here in the Yukon. So as I speak, there's a couple of us that are now looking at ways to make this work in the regional land use planning processes. I don't know if we'll be able to catch Dawson in time because they're quite well on their way, but we're looking at Teslin and also Kluani because they're right near the starting gate. So in regards to the model, all right, I forgot to mention, the Pelly Banks First Nation has adopted it to be their way of doing business within their traditional territory. So it's becoming now like a formal guidelines that people are very interested in. And I want to say that, you know, Katerina and I got together during the cold of winter to try to do something in the times of the pandemic crisis, and we worked on a One Health declaration for Yukon First Nations to consider based on their way. And from that time, I want to thank Katerina for giving me a hand in regards to giving me some ideas in regards to BMC, or could say KEA, in which I'll be involved with through the Pelly Banks. And Katerina also was involved with helping me putting together my presentation I'll be given next week. So again, thank you, Katerina, and for giving me that plug in regards to the IPCAs. So yeah, it's quite evident is that from many of the projects that I'm involved with, parallels or I can see that CPAWS is very in tune, because in the model, the common collaborative knowledge between Western science and Indigenous knowledge is sustainable development, where Western scientists say sustainability, we say you take care of the land and the land takes care of you, and you take only what you need. So if these organizations throughout the territory now moving across the country and being adopted as a formal governance guideline, I would like to propose that CPAWS consider adopting this model as one of your guidelines, as has already been, I feel, well received with your board last summer. So I'd like to leave it at that and say thank you again for working closely together with some of the projects I've been involved with. I'm going to sheesh, and if you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer.
Ashish. Thank you so much for spending the time to be with us here tonight, and thank you to Joe Kopacek for your presentation this evening. We really appreciate you you doing that. So,
yes, and on behalf of our board, thank you very much for your presentation. It was much appreciated.
Joe, I had a question. I had a question about the Pelly Banks group. What is that? Is that Ross River Plus, or?
Yeah, the Pelly Banks group was recognized as an Indian band back in the early 20s, or sorry, early 1900s. I think their main settlement was Pelly Lakes. I think in 1949 had a number count of about 79. And in 1956, they were amalgamated with Ross River, and half of them were shipped to Liard First Nation. And also there was an option to go to Tesla. I think one person went to Tesla. So after 65 years of being misplaced, they decided that they wanted to go home. And now they're in that process of reinstatement. And once they attain that or they achieve that designation as an Indian band, they will continue on with their other governance over their traditional territory. And part of that is to look at ways of becoming self-sustaining. So BMC is there. They have the experience of wolverine and quetzal and pharaoh to avoid. And so they've asked me to give them a hand there, because I have been involved with the other two amalgamations in the Yukon, White River, with Tawani River, Tawani Lake. We did their separation back in 1989, and they got their letter of authority that gave them their Indian Act status in 1990, and also was instrumental in reinstating Tonquatchin. Started in 97, we got their legal treaty number back in 1998. So this is the third amalgamation. And I guess because of my track record, they've asked me to give them a hand. So you're gonna see a traditional government being reborn again. And as I said, I was very happy that Katerina was offered some good suggestions in regards to e-energy and some renewable sources of energy that Pelly Banks could consider. And yeah, we'll be meeting with them very soon, I think within a week or so, and So things are happening, and as I said, because of Katerina, you guys are involved in a good way, and hope to continue that relationship.
Yeah, I'll add that we've done 2 challenging letters to YESAB over the last few months, and one had to do with the Kutsukaya mine, and Malcolm and I worked on that, especially given Malcolm's knowledge about the caribou herds of the Yukon, and me being new and not knowing where each herd is located, and that's the Finlayson herd there. And Randy and I worked on our comments about the coffee mine, which is proposed in Trondequichin traditional territory. Yes, two projects that YESAB is assessing at this time. So if we can see mines using more renewable energy, and maybe the Yukon eventually looking into e-waste mining like British Columbia is, that would be good things to see, and that's something that the Yukon Conservation Society certainly works more on, given Louis Rifkin's engineering and other relevant background.
Yes, I forgot also too that Louis is becoming, has shared some of his knowledge also the other night from the meeting with him. And yeah, thank you.
Well, and thank you to everybody for having joined us this evening. I think we've come to sort of a natural end, unless anybody wants to put forward any comments or thoughts before we sign off. Great. Well, thank you again for joining us this evening, and please be safe, and we'll meet again soon sometime.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.
All right.